Hello. The sound came first, a low mechanical grinding that started before dawn and didn't stop until the sun had burned off the morning fog. Sarah Chen stood at her kitchen window with cold coffee in her hand, watching the drilling rig work its way deeper into the earth at the edge of her property line. She'd been watching for 3 days now. The crew wore high-visibility vests with the HOA contractor's logo. They'd arrived on a Tuesday without warning, without knocking on her door, without any conversation at all. Just the truck, the rig, and 6 men who set up their equipment 15 feet from her fence and started drilling. She'd called the HOA office that first afternoon. The woman who answered, Brenda, had put her on hold for 11 minutes before coming back with a prepared statement about community water infrastructure and planned improvements outlined in the quarterly newsletter. Sarah had stopped receiving the newsletter 8 months ago when she'd opted for email delivery. No emails had arrived. The property survey sat on her kitchen table now, corners weighted down with her coffee mug and a stack of unopened mail. She'd paid $240 to have it expedited. The surveyor had been apologetic when he'd marked the boundaries, his orange flags bright against the winter brown grass. The well sat 4 feet inside her property line, not close to it. Not arguably on some disputed boundary. 4 feet onto land she'd owned for 6 years, land she paid taxes on, the land the title company had certified clear when she'd signed the mortgage papers. She picked up her phone and took another photograph. She had 47 now, all time-stamped, all showing the same thing. The drilling rig, the crew, the growing pile of excavated earth that they were dumping in a depression near the tree line. Her tree line, her trees. The drilling had stopped yesterday afternoon. The crew had packed up their equipment, leaving behind a concrete pad and a pump housing with a padlocked metal cover. The whole installation looked permanent, professional, like something that had every right to be there. Sarah set down her coffee and pulled up the HOA's governing documents on her laptop. She'd read them twice already, searching for any clause that might explain this. The CC&Rs mentioned common areas, maintenance responsibilities, architectural review requirements. Nothing about drilling wells. Nothing about accessing private property for infrastructure projects. Nothing about water rights or mineral extraction, or any of the things that might make what she was looking at legal. Her neighbor Tom had texted her that morning. Just 2 words. Trees dying. She'd walked the property line after that, really looked at the trees for the first time since the drilling started. The live oaks that marked the eastern boundary, 30 feet tall, thick-trunked, older than her house, had started dropping leaves. Not the seasonal shedding of late winter, but something else. The leaves were brown at the edges, curling inward, falling in clusters that littered the ground like spent ammunition. She bent down and picked one up. It had smelled wrong, and sulfurous, sharp, like the hot springs she'd visited once in New Mexico, where the warning signs told you not to drink the water. The well pump had kicked on while she stood there, a mechanical hum that vibrated through the ground. She'd watched water begin flowing through a discharge pipe, running downhill across her property toward the drainage easement. The water had left a white mineral residue on the grass where it passed. Sarah photographed that too. Then she'd gone inside and started searching for attorneys who specialized in property law. The drilling rig was gone, but the damage was just beginning. She could see it spreading through the neighborhood, tree by tree, as the well pumped its contaminated water into soil that had been clean a week ago. The sulfur smell arrived first, not all at once, but creeping through the neighborhood like something that had learned to wait. By the time anyone thought to connect it to the well, 3 oak trees on Marianne Chen's property had already begun to die from the inside out. She noticed the browning on a Tuesday morning in late September, standing in her driveway with a coffee cup that had gone cold in her hand. The leaves shouldn't have looked like that. Not yet. Not in that particular shade of rust brown that started at the edges and worked inward, methodical as a stain spreading through fabric. By Friday, 2 more trees showed the same pattern. By the following week, her neighbor Tom Hendricks called to ask if she'd seen what was happening to the dogwoods along his fence line. The HOA's well had been operational for 6 weeks. Marianne walked the property that weekend with her phone, photographing each tree. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way she'd learned to move through problems during 23 years as a civil engineer. Document first, analyze second, react third, if at all. The oaks were old growth, probably 70 years if the property records were accurate. The replacement value would be considerable. She made a note to call an arborist. She made a second note to call her attorney. What she didn't do, what she would not allow herself to do, was walk to the property line where the well sat, still humming, still pulling water from a source no one had bothered to test before drilling. The contamination pattern became visible over the next 2 weeks. Not random, not scattered, that the damage radiated outward from the well site in a shape that would have been obvious to anyone who bothered to look at it from above. Marianne pulled up the county's aerial property maps and marked each reported tree death with a red dot. The pattern was undeniable. She compiled the data into a spreadsheet. Addresses, tree species, date of first visible damage, estimated age of trees, replacement costs based on current arborist rates. The numbers accumulated with a weight that felt almost physical. 42 trees across 9 properties. Replacement value approaching $200,000. And that was before you factored in soil remediation, property value loss, or the cost of removing root systems that would now leach sulfur into the ground for years. The HOA sent an email on October 15th, a cheerful update about the new well system, how it was performing beautifully, how the community should be proud of their forward-thinking water management solution. No mention of the trees, no mention of the smell that now hung over the eastern section of the neighborhood on humid mornings. No mention of the fact that the well sat on property they didn't own, pulling contaminated water they hadn't tested, killing vegetation they wouldn't have to replace. Marianne forwarded the email to her attorney with a single line. They're still operating it. The response came back within an hour. Get soil samples. Get water samples. I'm drafting the cease and desist now. She hired an environmental testing firm that afternoon. They arrived the next morning with equipment that looked more appropriate for a hazmat site than a suburban neighborhood. The lead technician, a woman named Sarah Voss, walked the property with the same methodical attention Marianne had used when photographing the trees. How long has the well been running? Sarah asked. 8 weeks. And they didn't test the water table first? Apparently not. Sarah knelt beside one of the dead oaks, pulled a soil sample from the base of the root system, sealed it in a container marked with the date and GPS coordinates. This is going to be bad, she said. Not a question. A statement delivered with the flat certainty of someone that could be Suburban who'd seen this particular kind of institutional negligence before. Marianne watched her work and said nothing. The documentation was building. The case was building. The cost, to the HOA, to the neighborhood, to whatever remained of the assumption that the people in charge had bothered to think before they acted, was building too. The morning after you discover what the HOA has done, you stand in your yard with your phone raised, photographing dead trees. This feels absurd. You are a homeowner taking pictures of your own property as if you are gathering evidence at a crime scene, which, you realize, is exactly what you are doing. The oak near your back fence went first. You remember when its leaves turned brown in July, weeks before autumn, the edges curling inward like burned paper. You thought it was drought stress. Everyone did. Now you understand it was sulfur poisoning, leaching through soil that should have been tested before anyone drilled anything. You photographed the oak from 4 angles. You include the fence line in each shot so the location is clear. You check the metadata on your phone to confirm the date stamp is visible. Then you move to the row of cedars along the property line. 7 of them planted the year you moved in, now skeletal and grey. Your neighbor Carol appears at the fence. She is holding her own phone. "I'm documenting too," she says. "My lawyer told me to photograph everything. Date, time, location. He said, make it like a crime scene." "That's what I'm doing." "Good." She lowers her phone. The Hendersons, 3 houses down, are doing the same thing. So are the Patels. We're all taking pictures of dead trees because the HOA poisoned our neighborhood. You move to the front yard. The maples here died slower, their leaves yellowing gradually before they dropped in August. You photograph each tree. You then step back and photograph the whole yard, showing the pattern of death radiating outward from where the well sits on your property. Inside, you spread the HOA documents across your kitchen table. There are 12 pages of meeting minutes, 3 years of correspondence, and 1 certified letter informing you that the well had been drilled and was now operational. That letter arrived 4 months after the drilling was complete. You photograph each page, making sure the text is legible in the images. You create a folder on your computer labeled HOA Well Evidence. You upload the photographs. You scan the documents and add them to the folder. You write a timeline in a Word document, starting with the first brown leaves and ending with yesterday's realization that the well sits 15 feet inside your property line. The property survey arrives by email at 2 in the afternoon. You requested it 3 days ago from the county assessor's office. You open the PDF and zoom in on the northwest corner of your lot. The well is marked with a small circle and the notation, Structure 2021. Your property line is marked in red. The well sits clearly, unmistakably, on your land. You print the survey. You photograph it on your kitchen table with your phone, then scan it at high resolution. You add both files to the evidence folder. You call an arborist. The first one cannot come for 2 weeks. The second can visit tomorrow morning. You book the appointment and ask what the assessment will include. Tree species identification, she says. Health evaluation. Cause of death analysis if determinable. Replacement cost estimates. A written report within 5 business days. You call a soil testing company. They can send someone next week to take samples and test for sulfur contamination, heavy metals, pH levels. The report will take 10 days. You book that appointment too. You photograph the well itself. The pump housing is beige plastic, unremarkable, sitting in a small concrete pad surrounded by gravel. It hums quietly. You take close-ups of the manufacturer's label, the electrical connection, the pipe descending into the ground. You photograph the gravel pad and measure its distance from your fence with a tape measure. 15 feet, 3 inches. By evening, you have 247 photographs, 18 scanned documents, and 4 appointments scheduled. You have done everything you can think of to preserve what happened here before anyone tries to claim it happened differently. The arborist arrived at 7 in the morning, earlier than Marcus expected. He watched from the kitchen window as the man, 50s, weathered hands, clipboard already out, walked the perimeter of what used to be the backyard's shade canopy. 3 oaks, 2 maples, 1 dogwood that had bloomed every April for 12 years. All of them brown now, skeletal. Marcus pulled on his jacket and met him at the largest oak. Marcus Chen. The arborist extended a hand. Bill Kowalski. You said on the phone this happened over about 6 weeks. Started mid-March. Leaves came in sparse, then yellowed. By May they were dropping. Kowalski circled the oak, running his palm along the bark. He stopped at a section where the trunk had split vertically, a seeping wound that hadn't been there in winter. He photographed it from 3 angles, then knelt at the base and scraped soil into a sample jar. You smell that? Marcus did. Faint, but distinct. Rotten eggs. Hydrogen sulfide. Kowalski said. Means sulfur in the groundwater. Trees this size, their root systems go down 15-20 feet. They're pulling it straight up. He moved to the maple, repeated the process. More photos, more samples. How many properties affected? 14 that I've counted, maybe more. Kowalski made a note. I'll need to see the well. They walked to the property line. The wellhead sat 8 feet inside Marcus's fence, a concrete pad with a green pump housing and a pressure gauge that ticked quietly. And someone had staked orange flags in a circle around it. The surveyor's work from 2 days ago. Kowalski photographed the setup, then the flags, then the fence line. HOA drilled this. Without asking. Jesus. He crouched beside the wellhead, studying the gauge. They running it on a timer? Twice a day, morning and evening. For how long? Since February. Kowalski stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Here's what's happening. They drilled into a sulfur-bearing aquifer, probably hit it around 150 feet down. Every time that pump runs, it's pulling sulfur compounds into the irrigation system and dumping it across the neighborhood. Your trees are drinking poison twice a day. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Can they recover? The dogwood's gone. The maples. Maybe if you stop the contamination now and do aggressive soil remediation. The oaks. He shook his head. They're too far gone. You're looking at removal and replacement. What's that cost? Kowalski pulled out his phone, tapped through a calculator app. Mature oak removal, stump grinding, soil treatment, replacement planting with comparable specimens. You're looking at 18 to 25,000 per tree. Marcus did the math. $75,000 for his yard alone. I'll have the full report to you in 48 hours, Kowalski said. Soil samples, contamination levels, replacement cost breakdown. You'll want an environmental engineer too, someone who can test the aquifer and document the contamination source. You know anyone? I'll send you 2 names. He paused at his truck, one hand on the door. This is bad, Mr. Chen. I've seen sulfur damage before, but never from an HOA well on private property. You're going to need that documentation airtight. Marcus watched him drive away, then walked back to the oak. He pressed his palm against the bark the way Kowalski had. It felt brittle, dead wood under his hand. His phone buzzed. Text from the surveyor. Final report ready. Well is 8.3 feet inside your property line. Certified. Another text, this one from Jennifer Watts 3 houses down. Arborist coming Thursday. Did yours give you a number yet? He looked at the oak, at the split trunk weeping sap, at the branches that would never leaf again. 75,000. He typed back. Just for mine. The reply came fast. Oh my God. The law recognizes certain violations as so fundamental that they pierce through paperwork, through bylaws, and through the careful language of covenants and restrictions. What the HOA did to your property falls into this category. Not a grey area. Not a matter of interpretation. A series of clear, actionable wrongs that any court will understand the moment the evidence is presented. Trespass is the simplest. They came onto your land without permission and drilled a hole into the earth. The well sits on your property. The survey confirms it. The plat map confirms it. And unless they can produce a document you signed granting them access, which they cannot, the trespass is established. This isn't about whether they meant to. Intent doesn't matter. They were where they had no right to be, doing something permanent to land that belongs to you. From trespass flows conversion. By drilling that well, they didn't just cross your property line. They took something. Water rights in your jurisdiction belong to the landowner. When they sunk that well shaft through your soil and began extracting groundwater, they converted your property right into their use. Every gallon they pumped is a gallon they took from you. The law treats this the same way it treats someone walking into your garage and driving away in your car. Nuisance is the claim that covers what happened after. The sulfur contamination that killed your trees and your neighbor's trees, that made the air smell like rotten eggs on humid days, that turned the neighborhood into a place people warned their friends about. That's nuisance. Private nuisance for the direct damage to your property. Public nuisance for the neighborhood-wide impact. The HOA created a condition that substantially interfered with your use and enjoyment of your land. They made your property less livable. The law doesn't tolerate that. Negligence is where their decision-making becomes evidence. A reasonable HOA board, before drilling a well, would have tested the water quality, would have consulted with hydrogeologists, would have obtained proper permits, and conducted environmental assessments. They did none of these things. They drilled blind, and when the water came up contaminated, they kept using it anyway. That's not just carelessness. That's a failure to exercise even basic care. And when that failure causes damage, it creates liability. The property damage claim is straightforward math. Every dead tree has a replacement value. Mature trees aren't cheap. A single established oak can cost thousands to replace. And that's before you factor in the labor, the soil remediation required before anything new can be planted, the years of growth you've lost. Multiply that across your property and across the neighborhood, and the numbers become significant very quickly. Then there's diminished property value. Your home is worth less now than it was before the HOA drilled that well. Appraisers will confirm it. Comparable sales in the neighborhood will show the decline. Buyers don't want to purchase into a community with contaminated groundwater and dead trees. They don't want to inherit someone else's environmental problem. That loss in value is a compensable harm. Some jurisdictions allow for punitive damages when the defendant's conduct goes beyond mere negligence into recklessness or willful disregard. If the HOA knew or should have known about the contamination risk and proceeded anyway, if they ignored warnings or cut corners to save money, if they continued operating the well after the damage became obvious, those facts support punitive damages. The purpose isn't just to compensate you, it's to punish conduct so egregious that it warrants additional penalty. You don't choose one of these claims. You bring all of them. Each one tells a different part of what happened. Each one establishes a different dimension of liability. Together, they form a legal framework that transforms your story from a neighborhood dispute into a case with teeth. They're the HOA's insurance company. Will understand this immediately. So will any competent attorney they hire. The question isn't whether you have claims. The question is how much those claims are worth. The mathematics of loss do not care about intention. They exist in the cold space between what was and what remains, calculated in dead wood and poisoned earth, and the specific dollar amount a jury might assign to a neighborhood that will never look the same again. Your attorney will build the damages claim in layers, each one stacked atop the last until the full scope becomes undeniable. The tree replacement costs alone will make the HOA board go pale. A mature oak does not cost what you paid for it as a sapling 20 years ago. It costs what it would take to install a comparable tree today. Root ball, crane rental, arborist supervision, warranty, the works. $15,000 per tree is not unusual. $20,000 for specimens over a certain diameter. Multiply that across your property and the affected lots around you, and the number climbs into six figures before anyone has even addressed the soil. The soil remediation is its own category of ruin. Sulfur contamination does not simply wash away with rain. It bonds. It persists. The environmental engineer's report will specify the cubic yards of earth that must be excavated and disposed of as contaminated material, then replaced with clean fill and amended topsoil. The cost runs by the truckload. Your yard, your neighbor's yards. Everywhere the contaminated water touched during those months, the HOA operated their disaster of a well. Then comes the property value diminution. This is where the appraiser earns their fee. They will calculate what your home was worth before the well, what it is worth now with a documented environmental contamination event in the neighborhood, and the difference becomes a line item in the demand. Buyers do not want to hear about sulfur in the groundwater, even if it has been remediated. The stigma alone costs you equity. Your attorney will also pursue loss of use and enjoyment. You could not use your yard as intended during the contamination period. You could not garden in poisoned soil. You could not let children or pets play in areas where the water table had been compromised. These are real losses, even if they feel harder to quantify than a dead tree. The law recognizes that property is not just an asset. It is the place you live. The emotional distress claim is more complicated. Some jurisdictions allow it in cases of property damage if the conduct was sufficiently outrageous. Drilling a well on someone else's land without permission and poisoning the neighborhood might qualify. Your attorney will know whether to include it or whether it weakens the stronger claims by association. Punitive damages are the weapon you save for trial. They exist not to compensate you for loss, but to punish the HOA for conduct so reckless or malicious that a message must be sent. If the board knew the well was on your property and drilled anyway, that is recklessness. If they continued operating it after the contamination became apparent, that is worse. Punitive damages are the multiplier that turns a significant verdict into a devastating one. They are also the reason cases settle before trial. Your attorney will total the economic damages, trees, soil, remediation, property value loss, professional fees, and that number becomes the floor of the demand letter. It will be substantial. It will feel almost abstract in its size, like a figure meant for corporations rather than a neighborhood dispute over a well. But the HOA created this. They made the choice to drill without permission, to skip the testing, to operate the well even as the trees began to die. Every dollar in the damages claim is a consequence they set in motion the day they brought the drilling rig onto your land. The demand letter will give them 30 days to respond. It will itemize every category of loss. It will attach the professional reports as exhibits. It will be the last opportunity for the HOA to resolve this before the court makes the decision for them. And if they refuse, the complaint will be filed and the damages claim will become a public record. The HOA's attorney arrived at the mediation with 3 leather binders and the expression of someone who'd done this 100 times before. She was younger than the homeowners expected. Mid-30s, sharp suit, the kind of confidence that comes from institutional backing, and a retainer that doesn't run out. She set the binders on the conference table with deliberate care, aligned them precisely, and opened the first one to a tab marked Easements and Common Areas. My clients maintain, she began, that the well in question was drilled on property designated as common area under the subdivision plat recorded in 1987. Section 4.2 of the CC&Rs grants the HOA broad authority to maintain and improve common areas for the benefit of all residents. The homeowner's attorney didn't look up from his notes. He'd warned them this was coming. The easement defense. The HOA's first line of retreat when caught doing something they shouldn't have done on someone else's land. The survey commissioned by my clients shows the well is 14 feet inside the property line of Lot 23, he said, not on common area, not on an easement, on deeded property owned by the Castellanos family since 2003. The HOA attorney turned a page. The original plat shows a drainage easement extending from the street to the retention pond. That easement, we believe, encompasses the area where the well was drilled. Drainage easements don't grant mineral rights, the homeowner's attorney said. They don't grant water extraction rights. They certainly don't grant the right to drill an unregulated well that contaminates the surrounding soil with hydrogen sulfide. The HOA attorney moved to the second binder. My clients also note that the Castellanos family, along with all other homeowners, signed the CC and Rs upon purchase. Those CC and Rs include a provision, Section 7.8, requiring homeowners to permit reasonable access for HOA maintenance and improvements. The well was drilled to provide irrigation water for common areas, which benefits all residents. This was the second defense, implied consent. The idea that by buying into the HOA, the homeowners had agreed to let the board do whatever it deemed necessary for the community's benefit. Section 7.8 requires notice and reasonable access, the homeowner's attorney said. It doesn't authorize permanent structures. It doesn't authorize environmental contamination. And it certainly doesn't authorize the HOA to destroy 37 mature trees across 6 properties without so much as a phone call. The HOA attorney's pen paused over her legal pad. The number, 37, was higher than she'd been told. The environmental report had been thorough. The arborist had been meticulous. Every dead tree documented, every sulfur reading recorded, every property line confirmed. My clients are prepared to discuss remediation, she said, pivoting. Replacement trees, soil testing, perhaps a contribution toward landscaping costs. This was the third defense, though it wasn't really a defense at all. It was the offer that comes when the first 2 defenses fail. The attempt to settle before the case gets ugly, before the neighbors organize, before the local news picks up the story of an HOA poisoning its own community. Your clients drilled an unpermitted well on private property, the homeowner's attorney said. They extracted water without testing it. They contaminated soil across multiple lots. They've diminished property values throughout the subdivision. Replacement trees and soil testing don't address the trespass. They don't address the negligence. And they certainly don't address the fact that the well is still there, still on my client's property, still operational. The HOA attorney closed the second binder. She did not open the third. What do your clients want? She asked. The well removed, full remediation, compensation for damages, and a commitment that the HOA will never again undertake construction or drilling on private property without explicit written consent from the property owner. The room went quiet. Outside, the sun had moved behind the building, and the conference room had gone grey. The morning after the demand letter went out, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad divided into columns. 30 days until the HOA's response deadline. 60 days until filing if they stonewalled. 90 days until her attorney fees started compounding in ways that would require a second mortgage if this went badly. She wrote the timeline in her own hand first, and then compared it against the version Marcus had sent. His was cleaner, formatted in a table with contingencies branched out like a decision tree. Hers looked like what it was, a homeowner trying to think like a lawyer while staring at dead trees through the window. The immediate phase was already in motion. Documentation complete. Expert reports commissioned. Demand letter delivered. The well sat capped and silent on her property, marked now with survey stakes that proved what the HOA had spent 6 months pretending wasn't true. Marcus had been explicit about the next decision point. Wait for their response or file immediately and negotiate from a position of active litigation. Most HOAs settle, he said during their last call. They're insured for this. Their carrier will look at the engineering report, the arborist assessment, the property survey, and they'll run the numbers. Fighting this cost them more than settling it. But Sarah had sat through enough HOA meetings to know how boards operated when their authority was challenged. They'd vote to fight on principle, spend the association's reserves on legal fees, then assess every homeowner to cover the shortfall. They'd turn her into the villain who drove up everyone's dues while her own legal bills mounted. The strategic timeline assumed rational actors, It assumed insurance carriers who made cost-benefit analyses and board members who understood fiduciary duty. It didn't account for Larry Hoffman's ego or the neighborhood Facebook group, where half the comments still blamed her trees for being too sensitive to a little sulfur. She moved to the second page. The parallel track Marcus had outlined if the HOA refused to engage. File the complaint. Serve the board members individually. Request immediate injunctive relief to prevent any further well operation. The court date for the preliminary injunction would come fast, within 2 weeks. That hearing would set the tone for everything that followed. You'll need to be ready to testify, Marcus had said, about the property line, about when you first noticed the damage, about every conversation with the HOA. They'll try to make it seem like you waited too long or that you gave implicit permission by not objecting sooner. Sarah had already started drafting her timeline of events, working backward from the day she'd found the survey stakes to the first board meeting where someone had mentioned exploring water options. 18 months of decisions made in executive session, of closed-door votes, of a well drilled on her land while she paid her assessments and assumed the people running the HOA understood basic property law. The final phase of the timeline stretched into territory that made her stomach tight. Discovery, depositions, mediation if they were lucky, trial if they weren't. Marcus estimated 8 to 14 months from filing to resolution, and that assumed the HOA didn't countersue for something creative, didn't try to amend the CC and RS retroactively, didn't drag in every neighbor as a third party. She looked at the number he'd written at the bottom of his timeline, so the estimated total cost to litigate fully if the HOA forced it to trial. Then the number next to it, the estimated damages she could recover if she won everything. The gap between them was smaller than it should have been. Sarah folded the timeline and slid it into the folder with the rest of the case documents. 30 days until the HOA responded. She'd know by then whether they understood what they'd done, or whether this was going to get worse before it got better. Outside, the surveyor's stakes cast long shadows across the dead grass, where the well had poisoned everything it touched.